in your book, I was a terrible kid, just awful, one of the worst.
Oh, I was. I said, like, 16, all that testosterone, like, and it just went like...
Face this verdict. Those were the harsh words delivered by the federal judge to Rick Harrison, the star of the popular television series Pawn Stars, just before sentencing him to life in prison without the possibility of parole. A verdict that shocked the public, a downfall no one saw coming. The man who once stood behind thousands of antiques, who brought historical knowledge into the living rooms of millions of viewers, now found himself convicted of money laundering, tax evasion, and illegally trading antiquities in a vast international network. The courtroom fell completely silent as the sentence was announced. Chumlee broke into tears. Cory lowered his head. Rick turned pale. And the public was left stunned, haunted by one burning question. Was everything they once believed just a carefully orchestrated act? Was something hidden all along? Is Rick Harrison a cunning mastermind or merely a victim caught in a system far more powerful than himself? Watch this video to uncover the answer. Part 1. From a troubled childhood to a symbol of success. To understand the devastating downfall of Rick Harrison in the courtroom in 2025, we need to trace back through time, to where all the glory, spotlight, and ultimately the seeds of tragedy began. Rick's story isn't about a con man emerging from the shadows. On the contrary, it's a classic tale of rising above hardship in American culture, where a boy with epilepsy who dropped out of school early managed to build a media and business empire worth tens of millions of dollars. Rick Harrison was born in 1965 in Lexington, North Carolina, into a working-class family. At just 8 years old, Rick began battling epilepsy, a condition that not only affected his physical health, but also left him feeling isolated in the school environment. Long absences from class gradually set him apart from his peers, and eventually he made the decision to drop out in 10th grade, a choice that seemed to close the door on the future of any average teenager. But for Rick, it marked the beginning of a completely different path: self-education. Rick spent most of his time in the library, voraciously reading anything related to history, the military, and ancient cultures. This dedication to reading and self-learning turned him into a living encyclopedia, the foundation he would later use to appraise and share the stories behind thousands of antiques on Pawn Stars. Despite never attending any formal training programs, Rick became a vivid example of the idea that passion and self-education can overcome any limitations imposed by fate. Still, the academic side was just one part of who Rick was. The other, and perhaps more defining trait, was his entrepreneurial spirit, shaped in his early teens when he began helping his father, Richard "Old Man" Harrison, with small-scale buying and selling. In 1981, the Harrison family moved to Las Vegas, a city of opportunity, where the dazzling neon lights masked both hope and danger. There, the father and son opened the Gold and Silver Coin Shop, a modest store focused on buying and reselling collectible coins, jewelry, and items of historical value. The pawn business was far from a walk in the park. Rick and his father faced a wide range of challenges, from aggressive, dishonest customers to intricately crafted counterfeit items. But it was through these difficult situations that Rick honed his sharp eye for appraisal, developed strong negotiation skills, and built the confidence to handle tough encounters, all of which became key elements of his personal brand later on. However, the real turning point came when Rick realized the entertainment aspect of his daily work. When he witnessed firsthand the strange items, tense bargaining sessions, and the historical stories hidden behind each item, Rick understood that pawnbrokering was not just about business. It could truly become an engaging television show. He spent many years persistently contacting television producers, sending them pitch ideas, editing content, and working hard to convince TV networks of the potential for a reality show centered around a pawn shop. It wasn't until 2009, after countless rejections, that Rick finally convinced the History Channel to sign a production deal for the show Pawn Stars. And the rest, as they say, is history. Pawn Stars quickly became a global phenomenon, not only due to its entertainment value, but also because of the perfect blend of knowledge, reality, and the distinct personalities of each character. Rick took on the role of the steady hand, the stern, perceptive father figure who always balanced his son, Cory, hot-tempered, and Chumlee, humorous and emotionally rich. Unlike many other reality shows, Pawn Stars offered real value. Each episode conveyed useful knowledge, especially about history, something Rick had been passionate about since childhood. The stories behind a Civil War-era gun, an ancient map, or a Roman coin, all were told by Rick with such enthusiasm that viewers were not only captivated, but also inspired to learn. Rick was not merely a storyteller, he was a knowledge transmitter in his own unique way. Not stopping there, Rick leveraged the popularity of the show to expand his business empire. He opened a chain of restaurants called Rick's Rollin' Smoke BBQ, published a book titled License to Pawn, opened a souvenir shop, partnered with fashion brands, and even organized tours of the pawn shop. Rick was not just a TV personality, he was a true entrepreneur, knowing how to seize every opportunity to grow his personal brand. That image of a sick child who self-taught to succeed, built a career from scratch, and became a global inspiration, helped create the perfect Rick Harrison in the public's eye. And because it was so ideal, when the shock came in 2023, the public reaction was not only one of astonishment, they felt deceived. Because if even Rick, the embodiment of knowledge, ethics, and the entrepreneurial spirit, could get entangled in legal trouble for fraud and law violations, then who could people trust? But perhaps it's still too early to conclude, because the journey ahead will lead us into a darker and more complex chapter, one where the television lights no longer shine. Part 2. The Unexpected Legal Storm of 2023. No one could have predicted that, on an ordinary morning in June 2023, the Gold and Silver Pawn Shop, a television icon known to millions of Americans, would become the scene of a large-scale raid involving dozens of federal agents. What happened that day was like something out of an action movie, but what truly stunned people wasn't the number of agents or the armed equipment. It was the name behind the investigation: Rick Harrison. According to witnesses, around 9 a.m., a force of FBI agents, IRS officials, and representatives from the Cultural Heritage Protection Agency sealed off the entire area around the pawn shop on Las Vegas Boulevard. The agents entered the shop, ordered all employees and customers to leave their positions, prohibited phone use, and sealed off all computers, accounting records, and numerous displayed antiques. At the same time, another team carried out a search of Rick Harrison's mansion in Henderson. There, Rick was taken away without resistance, although his face was pale and silent. News of the incident spread like wildfire across social media. A video showing Rick being escorted out of his home quickly became a trending topic on Twitter, Reddit, and antique collector forums. The question was raised everywhere: what had happened? How could a man, once known as the friendly face of television, be involved in such a serious criminal investigation? A few days later, official announcements from the authorities revealed a series of serious charges: large-scale tax evasion, money laundering through antique transactions, and especially involvement in a network trafficking stolen antiques from museums and private collections. According to court documents, Rick was accused of using a double-entry bookkeeping system for many years to conceal large transactions. Rare antiques, such as 18th-century pocket watches, historical documents of U.S. presidents, and even ancient coins worth hundreds of thousands of dollars, were recorded at low values to reduce taxes, and then secretly sold at market prices through private auctions with intermediaries. A former employee of Rick, who provided crucial information, was identified as the whistleblower in the case. This individual provided internal documents, encrypted emails, and even audio recordings of private meetings, in which Rick allegedly guided how to clean the history of items to conceal their illegal origins. The accusations became even more serious when it was discovered that some of the antiques, which had been stolen from university archives or museums in Europe, had appeared at the pawn shop or in Rick's private storage. Additionally, financial institutions discovered numerous suspicious cash transactions exceeding the reporting threshold, but broken down into smaller amounts to avoid scrutiny. Some funds were also transferred to countries considered tax havens, such as Luxembourg and Panama, which have now been included in the investigation. For Rick, these accusations were not just a legal matter. They were a direct blow to his personal reputation, something he had built over the past 3 decades. Rick was not just an antiques dealer. He was a storyteller, an unofficial teacher to millions of people. The accusations of betraying the very values he had preached shocked the public and led to deep skepticism. Immediately after being released on bail, Rick held a brief press conference at his lawyer's office. Wearing a gray shirt and looking tired, Rick spoke briefly. "I am completely innocent. Everything will be cleared up in court." Afterward, his lawyer, David Marshall, who had represented many high-profile figures in Las Vegas, took over. Marshall stated, "My client has always followed the law and maintained transparency in his business practices. This case is the result of a personal vendetta by a former employee with a hidden agenda." He criticized the media for having tried Rick from the very beginning. Meanwhile, Cory Harrison, Rick's son, avoided speaking to the press, posting only a short message on Instagram. "My family is going through the toughest time. Please, give us some time." Chumlee, Rick's close friend and longtime co-star, appeared in court with a worried expression, avoiding all questions from reporters. Gold and silver pawn shop remained open, but the atmosphere had changed. The number of customers had dropped significantly, with many only coming to take photos with the once famous sign. But the joy was no longer there. Some loyal fans gathered outside the shop holding signs that read, "Rick is innocent," while others took to social media to criticize him, feeling deceived after years of watching the show. As public opinion remained divided, some experts began to warn. The case involving Rick Harrison might just be the tip of the iceberg in the antiques trade industry. An archaeologist from UCLA commented, "The high-value antiques market has always existed in a large gray area. The issue is not just Rick Harrison, but the entire profit-driven ecosystem that operates in the gap between ethics and the law." The situation had now become incredibly tense. Rick was no longer just an entertainment figure. He had become a symbol of the clash between 2 viewpoints, one of justice and the other of public trust. And at this point, the case officially entered its most critical phase, a trial that would last nearly a year, where the truth, or complete collapse, would finally come to light. Part 3. The historic trial that lasted almost a year. At the end of 2023, the federal court in Las Vegas became the center of attention for the American media. It wasn't because of a murder case or a political scandal, but because of the trial of a famous TV personality. Rick Harrison, the man who once turned history into an intriguing commodity for a global audience. Every day, dozens of reporters stood outside the courtroom, and hundreds of fans queued up just to get a seat to witness the trial, much like a modern-day play where the stage was the courtroom and the lead character was on the brink of collapse. The trial began in an atmosphere of tension and skepticism. During the opening statements, the prosecution claimed that Rick Harrison had committed not only financial crimes, such as tax evasion and money laundering, but was also a key link in a network violating global cultural heritage. To support their argument, they presented a series of pieces of evidence: audio recordings of internal conversations, encrypted emails between Rick and sources providing artifacts, along with tax returns showing unusual discrepancies between the amounts of goods imported and sold and the money recorded. One of the most shocking pieces of evidence was an email between Rick and an unnamed seller in which Rick wrote, "Eliminate any trace of origin as soon as possible. No one needs to know it used to belong to the X University Museum." That line, displayed clearly before the jury, was like a knife that completely severed the image of Rick Harrison, the man who had once preached about cultural, historical values and honesty. Also in court, a former employee who had once managed the artifact storage at the shop testified that Rick had instructed to create a black book system to record sensitive transactions, which never appeared on official financial reports. The employee also revealed the use of intermediaries to withdraw cash from overseas accounts and give it to Rick to avoid detection by the bank. In a video collected by the FBI from a security camera at Rick's personal storage facility, agents discovered safes containing artifacts that were confirmed to have been stolen from several university storage facilities across Europe. The defense team, led by lawyer David Marshall, countered that the evidence presented was merely disjointed pieces that do not form a complete picture. They argued that the emails could have been manipulated, the witness testimonies might be motivated by personal gain, and that Rick had always consulted experts regarding the provenance of the items. Therefore, it was unfair to place personal blame on him for any mistakes. They even suggested that the case stemmed from envy, political pressure, and a desire to suppress the influence of reality TV on historical perceptions. However, over time, the momentum shifted in favor of the prosecution. A series of witnesses, from appraisers, artifact experts to former business partners, took the stand, delivering testimonies that were unfavorable. One expert from an international heritage protection organization stated, "Rick Harrison has not only violated the law, but he has also contributed to the laundering of stolen artifacts, severely damaging the authenticity and long-term research value of world heritage." With each hearing, Rick's demeanor grew heavier. The man who was once confident, sharp, and full of energy on television now appeared noticeably older. Many people watching the trial shared that Rick seemed like a mere shadow of his former self, sitting silently, his hands clasped together, occasionally glancing at Cory, his loyal son who was always present at the trial. The sentencing took place in March 2025, nearly a year after the investigation had begun. The courtroom was packed. From journalists, fans, to historians and artifact collectors, everyone was there. The atmosphere was so tense, it was suffocating. When the judge spoke, the entire courtroom seemed to hold its breath. After reviewing all the evidence, testimonies, and the severity of the crime, the court sentences the defendant, Rick Harrison, to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. The sentence hit like a thunderclap in the courtroom. Rick, who had maintained silence and composure throughout the trial, suddenly turned pale. His arm, which had been resting on the chair, dropped limply, and his gaze became vacant. Behind him, Cory held his head in his hands, unable to hold back tears. Chumlee quickly exited the courtroom, his face soaked with tears, refusing all contact with the press. Those present described it as follows. The entire space seemed to freeze for a few seconds. No one could believe it. The judge continued, his voice stern. "Mr. Harrison, you have claimed to be a guardian of history. But in reality, you have participated in an illegal network that has caused serious harm to our shared cultural heritage. Today's verdict is not just about punishing an individual. It is meant to emphasize that no one, not even a public figure, has the right to trample on history and the law for personal gain." That statement not only closed the door to Rick's freedom, but also sparked a widespread debate in society. Can the image of a television hero disappear so quickly just because of a series of wrong decisions? And is justice truly fair, or is it simply using Rick as a scapegoat to warn others? Immediately after the sentence was announced, public reactions surged across the United States. Half of the public believed the sentence was fair and deserved, given the actions Rick had taken, especially as the theft of artifacts from international cultural heritage sites was becoming increasingly common. They emphasized, damaging history is an unforgivable crime. However, a significant portion of his fans expressed anger and doubt. They launched the Hearts for Harrison campaign on social media, gathering hundreds of thousands of signatures and calling for the sentence to be reconsidered. Many believed that Rick should not receive a life sentence for a crime not related to violence, and that he still deserved a chance to make amends and start over. Melissa Jenkins, one of the campaign founders, wrote, "We don't deny that Rick may have been wrong. But life imprisonment? No leniency? While those who commit more serious crimes get reduced sentences? This is not justice. This is revenge." Even among scholars and archaeologists, opinions were divided. A group of historians spoke in support of the sentence, claiming that Rick had betrayed the community by distorting the value of artifacts for commercial purposes. However, others argued, Rick is a product of a chaotic industry where laws are always lagging behind the reality. You can't place all the blame on one individual. Meanwhile, the History Channel immediately announced the termination of their partnership, canceled all plans to re-air Pawn Stars, and removed all episodes from their online platform. The channel's statement read, "We are deeply disappointed by Rick Harrison's actions. As a media company, we have a responsibility to uphold the cultural values that the show once represented." It seemed like everyone was turning against Rick. But for some, this was not the end. It was just the beginning of a new battle, fighting to save his reputation, regain trust, and more importantly, redefine the meaning of justice in a world where fame can be both a glory and a curse. Part 4. Impact after the verdict. With the life sentence without parole given to Rick Harrison, it was not only one individual's career that came to an end, an entire brand, a pop culture icon, also collapsed. Pawn Stars, the reality TV show that was once the pride of the History Channel, suddenly became a sensitive name, now associated with crime, deception, and the betrayal of historical values. The consequences of this case spread across various sectors of society, from the entertainment industry to the memorabilia collecting community, and especially to the Harrison family. Just hours after the verdict was announced, History Channel made an official statement cutting all ties with Rick Harrison and the Pawn Stars show. All episodes were removed from the online platform, advertising contracts were canceled, and plans for new releases were indefinitely frozen. The press release, although brief, was clear in stating, "As a public media company, we can no longer broadcast a show associated with an individual facing serious criminal charges. Pawn Stars will no longer be part of History Channel's content strategy." With this decision, more than 15 years of television history were virtually erased overnight. Rick's image as the calm, knowledgeable shop owner was replaced by the image of a convict in prison clothes, handcuffed, with a vacant stare. The gold and silver pawn shop, once a mecca for fans, now saw a sharp decline in customer numbers. Tourists came to take pictures, but were no longer eager to step inside. Memorabilia items bearing the Pawn Stars brand were also removed from the shelves. Local media reported that the revenue in the first 3 months of 2025 had dropped by over 70% compared to the same period the previous year. What Rick had built, a television empire combined with the commercialization of history, was now being undermined by those very values. From the peak of glory, Pawn Stars was frozen completely, facing the risk of never returning. In the midst of this crisis, all eyes turned to one person, Cory Harrison, Rick's son, who had once been seen as the heir to the show. In the past, Cory had been considered impulsive and lacking the resolve of his father. However, the harsh circumstances had transformed him into the center of the shop's revival, and perhaps the revival of the family's reputation. In a rare interview with local channel KSNV Las Vegas, Cory shared, "My father may have been wrong, but I don't believe he's an evil person. I believe he was caught up in a world where everything was no longer black and white, and I want to fix this for the whole family." Under Cory's leadership, Gold and Silver Pawn Shop began a comprehensive restructuring process. A series of independent artifact experts were brought in to verify the origins of each item. All transactions were moved to a fully digitized system, ensuring transparency and ease of customer inspection. Cory also signed partnerships with several museums and nonprofit organizations, committing to only dealing in artifacts with clear provenance, aiming to restore the honor of this profession. At the same time, former members like Chumlee also played a role in the brand's revival. Although he had steered clear of the media after the trial, Chumlee gradually returned and started appearing on podcasts, sharing the lessons he learned from Rick, both the right ones and the mistakes. In an emotional interview, he admitted, "Rick taught me how to recognize value in things that others discard. But perhaps he forgot that. The greatest value is transparency and honor." The pawn shop is no longer just a place of business. It has become a symbol of redemption, where history is not only bought and sold, but also respected. Despite losing trust from some of the public, Rick Harrison still received strong support from his loyal fans. On forums like Reddit, Facebook, and Twitter, numerous groups supporting Rick were formed, the most prominent being the Hearts for Harrison movement, where hundreds of thousands of people shared their memories of Pawn Stars, wrote encouraging letters, and even donated to Rick's legal fund. One fan shared in a viral TikTok video, "Rick taught me to love history. Thanks to him, I became a teacher. If he was wrong, I still can't forget the impact he had on me." Every weekend, in front of the gold and silver pawn shop, people witnessed an unusual sight. Dozens of people standing in line, not to pawn items, but to pray for Rick. They held signs reading, "Justice for Rick, legends fall, but never forgotten." Many wrote handwritten letters, sent old photos they had taken with Rick, or items they had purchased from the shop, as a way to remind themselves of the golden days that had passed. In a press conference, Cory tearfully shared, "I read every letter, every word of encouragement. It's the support from everyone that helped us stand up. We can't change the past, but we can build a future that's more deserving." The affection from the fans was not just moral support. It also served as the foundation for the Harrison family to restore their honor. From the ruins, they chose to face the situation, rebuild, and hold on to the most important thing: trust. Part 5. Rick Harrison's present life. After a trial that was considered a historic milestone concluded with a harsh life sentence, Rick Harrison, once a familiar face on television, a successful businessman, and a symbol of a history-loving generation, is now living the life of a federal inmate. Held at a medium-security prison in Arizona, Rick is no longer known as the famous pawn shop owner, but instead has become inmate the 6832 LV, a number that has replaced the name once associated with the spotlight of mainstream media. According to his family and legal team, Rick lives in relative isolation behind bars. He rarely participates in communal activities and spends most of his time in the prison library, reading, writing letters, and reflecting. One fellow inmate told the press that Rick often reads history books, particularly materials about business ethics, cultural heritage, and criminal law. A former friend of Rick's, who served as a consultant during the early seasons of Pawn Stars, shared on a podcast, "I think Rick is now living in nostalgia and regret. He's not entirely a bad guy. He just crossed the line. But even he didn't expect the price to be this steep." The letters Rick has sent home to his family reflect a shifting emotional state, sometimes sorrowful, sometimes remorseful, and occasionally filled with a glimmer of hope. In one letter, partially shared by Cory on Instagram, Rick wrote, "Live the way I taught you to, not the way I failed to. I can't deny my mistakes, but our family still has a legacy worth making right." Immediately after the sentencing, Rick's legal team filed an appeal with the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Ninth Circuit, arguing that a life sentence was too severe for a non-violent offense, and that Rick did not receive a fair trial due to media influence. However, by early 2025, the first appeal was rejected. Nonetheless, the appeals process continues. His lawyers have shifted strategies, focusing on proving that some evidence presented at the initial trial may have been obtained through improper procedures. They've also enlisted the support of international human rights organizations in hopes of generating outside public pressure. Still, the chances of a retrial for Rick remain slim. The U.S. judicial system, especially in federal cases, rarely overturns verdicts unless there's a major procedural error. Furthermore, the sentence was not solely about economic misconduct. It also served as a social message that fame cannot be used as a shield for illegal behavior, particularly when it causes harm to human culture. Even while imprisoned, Rick Harrison hasn't completely faded from public memory. Old Pawn Stars videos are still being shared on YouTube, even though the show is no longer officially airing. Fan pages continue to post photos, quotes, and tributes to the legendary deals Rick once made. Strangely enough, despite having a criminal conviction, Rick remains a name that evokes mixed emotions, part regret, part respect. Someone once shared, "He made me fall in love with history. I just wish he had stopped before things went too far." Another person spoke more bluntly, "Rick Harrison is proof that intelligence can't replace integrity." During prayer gatherings outside the shop, Rick's name is still mentioned, not as a criminal but as a fallen family member. For many, Rick is more than just a public figure. He's a part of the memory of a time when reality TV still had real educational value. Rick Harrison's future is now a big question mark. Under his current sentence, he has no chance of early release. But if his appeal is successful, or if his sentence is reduced in the future, Rick might walk out of prison in his 70s. When that time comes, will society still welcome him? And if it does, will he have the strength to return to business, or at least reclaim part of his reputation? Cory once said in an interview, "My dad may never return to his old life, but I'll do everything I can so that when he looks back, he can say his family never gave up on him." That might be the only hope Rick still holds on to during his long, lonely days behind bars. There are no more camera lights, no more lines of tourists, no more deals like $5,000 down to $500. Now, Rick Harrison is left with only himself, and a future yet to be written. One of the deeper consequences of Rick Harrison's case is the exposure of the entire antiquities business ecosystem, especially in those gray areas where laws are unclear and the origins of items are easily obscured. Rick wasn't the first, and definitely won't be the last, in the industry to turn a blind eye to an artifact's provenance, as long as the item was attractive and profitable. But he is the first to be publicly prosecuted and hit with such a severe sentence, setting a precedent not just legally, but also ethically in the U.S. and across the global heritage preservation community. The question now is, do collectors, pawn shops, and auction houses truly vet the origins of these artifacts, or do they choose ignorance to avoid accountability? Rick's case is forcing the entire industry to re-examine its processes, from authentication and appraisal to the ethical standards of heritage trading. It also poses a major challenge to legal systems in trying to keep up with the rapid growth and complexity of the antiquities market. In a world where the lines between collecting, displaying, and trading are almost indistinguishable, Rick Harrison stands as a symbol of that very instability. He was someone who once walked the fine line between education and entertainment, between cultural value and commercial gain, and eventually lost control as he slid away from both sides. The case involving Rick Harrison has led many to seriously question the true value of the show Pawn Stars. On one hand, it was a remarkable television phenomenon, where viewers learned how to assess historical value through individual items, where seemingly anonymous stories were brought to life under the spotlight of the cameras. But from another perspective, the show has been seen as commodifying memory, turning history into a product for sale, sometimes at a cost beyond just money, involving concealment and a lack of authenticity. So in the end, what legacy has Pawn Stars really left behind? There's no definitive answer. For many, Rick Harrison and the show still represent a form of informal education, sparking a love for history and a deeper appreciation for the material artifacts tied to the past. But for others, it stands as a symbol of the tension between profit and ethics, an example of how media can build up a hero only to be the very force that brings them down. Still, amid all that confusion, one thing is undeniable. The case created a shockwave strong enough to force the reality TV industry, the collector community, and society at large to confront questions that had long been ignored. And somewhere along the journey of reevaluating our values, from media to commerce, from legality to morality, Rick's story will continue to live on as a painful but necessary lesson. Rick Harrison's journey, from a boy with epilepsy who had to drop out of school to a global reality TV icon and eventually facing a life sentence in prison, is a story no Hollywood screenwriter could have fully imagined. It has everything: hope, triumph, fame, and ultimately an irreversible fall from grace. At the height of his career, Rick Harrison was more than just a businessman or a television personality. He was a symbol of a generation that believed in knowledge, hard work, and second chances. Pawn Stars wasn't just an entertainment show. It served as a bridge that connected millions of viewers to history, culture, and untold stories. But that very success, coupled with the pressures of commercialization, public expectations, and growing fame, created a void, a place where Rick slowly drifted away from the values he once stood for. Rick's downfall wasn't just a legal sentence. It was the outcome of a series of moral compromises where each decision made for profit pushed him further from the core principles he once represented. And when the truth came to light, the most painful part wasn't the prison time. It was the collapse of his image, the shattered trust, and the cherished memories he had planted in the hearts of his fans. Yet even in the darkest tragedies, there's always room for redemption. Cory's resilience, the support from devoted fans, and the ongoing efforts to reform the original pawn shop, all of these suggest that while Rick may never return to his former place, the legacy he left behind can still be preserved, rebuilt, and most importantly, made right. Rick Harrison's case stands as a powerful warning about the cost of sacrificing integrity for short-term success. In a world where values are easily swayed by the media, this story serves as a reminder that public trust is fragile, painstakingly built, yet easily broken, and once broken, it's nearly impossible to fully restore. But from that very fracture comes an essential question. Can people forgive someone who once inspired them, if that person truly shows remorse and wants to make things right? It's a question not only for Rick Harrison, but for all of us, living in an era where the line between hero and villain is blurrier than ever. Has the whole truth really come out? Or are there still hidden corners of this case that no one has dared to uncover? Share your thoughts below. Do you believe Rick is a criminal or a victim? Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe so you won't miss the next chapter of this highly controversial story.